The Fitchburg Transportation and Transit Committee for May 13th, 2021. I'm Troy Klein. I'm the senior committee member since the committee chairs are not present. First item on the agenda is the minutes. I'd like to, has everybody had a chance to read the minutes?
Yes.
Okay.
I'll move to approve the minutes of the April 14th meeting.
Second.
Okay, we'll have a voice vote. Everybody agreeing to the minutes? Is there a discussion first? Any discussion? Okay. If not,
All in favor?
if it's in order to have everybody vote for the motion, everybody in favor of the minutes, say aye.
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 Motion agreed to. The minutes are agreed to as written. I don't. Okay, all right. Sorry. Next item is public appearances by the public for non-agenda items. Is there anyone? There's nobody in the chamber. Is there anybody online who wishes to speak on a non-agenda item?
Sir, everyone online is going to be speaking on an agenda item.
Okay. And
Do we,
go to that.
could I ask, do we have a quorum?
Would you like to have a roll call to establish a quorum?
Well, I don't know how many it requires and how many are here. I just thought I'd ask to be sure we do have a quorum.
I think you're only missing one or two at this time, so I think you have a quorum.
I think
Okay, that's
four,
fine.
four is a quorum. Okay.
Chairman, item number 3 is nomination and election of DPC chairman.
Okay, next order on the item is to nomination of a committee, of a commission chair. Are there any nominations?
I'd like to nominate Bill Horns.
Can you say that again?
I'd like to nominate Bill Horns.
Is there a second for the nomination?
Second.
Are there any other nominations? If not, the nominations are closed. As there's only one person nominated, it'd be in order for someone to request that we approve the nomination by acclamation.
So, all in favor?
Do we have a second for the
Yeah,
nomination by acclamation?
Gabriella.
Okay. All right. And all who approve the nomination, say aye.
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 Nomination approved. Is the new chairman present?
Yes, I'm present,
All right.
but
Then,
I'm not
Mr.
used to
Chairman?
being approved by acclamation. That seems a little,
I hand you the gavel, and you are now
Okay.
in charge of the meeting.
so I guess I just agreed to this. So we're up to approval of minutes. Did we complete that?
Yes, it is.
Okay, we've completed the agenda review. I'll just read off the items on the agenda. We're going to have a discussion of I guess I'm not sure I quite understand this. Is this Metro Transit redesign an agenda item?
Yes.
Yeah, yep, it's a review item.
So that is a review item, but I think we're to review the agenda, just to make sure it looks good. So that's the first, that'll be the first item that we discuss. Second will be item 6A, resolutions R6121. And then resolution R9221 in that order. Then we'll have a report from the department. Are there any concerns or comments about the agenda? Anyone want to propose changes? Seeing none?
I have a question. The review of revision 1 to the agreement of PD and MM appears to be an exact match of what we approved last meeting. Is that a new item?
Yep, yeah, it is. So in this case, it's the county cost share agreement. The last time, subtle difference, but last time it was the state municipal
Oh,
agreement.
so it's revision 2 then, or something like that?
It's revision 1, so 2 different agreements, same project.
Oh,
So
okay.
similar, in essence, that we have to kind of update one agreement and update the other agreement, but some of the
Okay,
costs
all right.
changed. So I just want
just
to.
wanted to be sure, because it was a little bit unclear to me when I read the item.
Okay, thanks for that comment, Troy. So I guess we'll move ahead with item 5A, Metro Transit Network Redesign. Andrew, why don't you take it away?
Sure. So a couple things. So I think I gave you kind of a preview of some of the transit survey last time. So we kind of topped out on the 28th before I met with Metro with 53 responses. On the website, we do have kind of an option for folks. So, Fitchburg Transportation Services, you can kind of check out the individual results if you're interested. Please bear with us and let us know if there's anything that doesn't make sense. We're kind of trying out this platform, or Survey 123, and so this is so it is available to everybody. So you can go check this out. But I can just kind of run down it quickly. So basically, the results of this, I kind of interpreted and then shared these with Metro Transit before they started their work on the 3 transit networks that they were kind of providing, with their consultant. Right now, they're kind of still preliminary and they haven't shared those, but they're kind of gonna do some. I think last week they finalized kind of the preliminary, and then now they're going to start doing some analysis on kind of what that means in terms of accessibility. And so this is, all this data went into that and kind of what areas, were kind of most important and based upon the survey. So thank you so much for those that were able to to fill us out. So, a lot of folks live in Fitchburg, so that's great. But we got a few folks that just travel, infrequently. So this got out a little bit farther, so that's good. So certainly kind of a bell curve in the age range. So most typically 35 to 55. This question of have you ever used transit or rideshare was asked, and so in the Manchester metro area, so actually the majority were yes, I believe. Yep. And so that's good. That's what we were hoping for. But we had some questions tailored to yes or no, and so you kind of see that. And so this is kind of pre-pandemic. How many times did you ride transit, or what frequency? And so certainly kind of all over the board. Whereas during the pandemic, really not a whole lot of ridership. And so this, I think, this is reflective of what we're seeing in the ridership numbers of still roughly 50% of kind of the pre-pandemic ridership.
So, excuse me, Andrew, what was the preceding slide that was?
Yeah, so this is how frequently folks use
Before,
transit
okay.
before. Yep, and then this is have used during. So yeah, we had some location-specific comments, so we were able to kind of let folks kind of toggle around and put points on a map and give some comments, and that was very useful. Folks were able to kind of specify, where they would like transit, that sort of thing. And then it was interesting to kind of get a general understanding of where folks or what services folks were riding. So the 40 is kind of our highest ridership route, or one of our highest ridership routes. 49 is commuter service. So, I mean, we really got a good mix of the spectrum of kind of where, folks riding different lines. And then, yep.
Is the none of these the non-users?
I I believe, yeah. I think that, I mean, typically the way that the survey structure is that if you said no, or if you said, you used some Metro Transit, but these were, tailored to Fitchburg, then maybe you used it somewhere else in the metro area. So, yeah, there were some folks who either, said yes when they didn't use it or use transit somewhere else or rideshare. So, yep, that's good catch. So primarily work purposes from the respondents that we got. This was interesting. What were the main reasons to use transit? So certainly saving money on parking. I know we've heard anecdotally that UW parking is very expensive, and that is a big driver. I think in from a cost benefit perspective of folks using transit. Certainly reducing environmental footprint, preferring car-free lifestyle, saving money on gas. Also, a lot of great reasons in there. And then the reasons folks don't is, really it's not going where they need it to go. It takes too long. It's not frequent enough. Kind of all the things that you would expect from, a service that, it in a lower density area, it's hard to cover everything with frequent service that's good quality without, costing a fortune. So, yeah, I mean, definitely what we expected, and it's good to see kind of some of that stuff corresponding to our thoughts. And then we asked, what would help folks ride more? What kind of features would help? And so, certainly expanded geography, expanded frequency. So those two things are kind of, all these things basically cost money that you see here. So, it's good to know. And so if we had to pick one thing over another, and that's kind of where we get to the ridership trade-off in a little bit. But we did ask how satisfied folks were. So nobody said very satisfied. And, most folks were kind of, the Midwest neutral, which is great. But yeah, I mean, and we did also some crosswalks based upon, what folks mentioned here versus some of their other responses, which it was very interesting as well. And then this was also interesting. So, again, balance is very positive that folks, wanted to see balance between ridership and coverage. And just to remind folks, ridership is really doubling down on a few routes, Fish Hatchery, kind of the Verona Road down to Target. So, having those be higher frequency, maybe 15-minute headways, so they would come every 15 minutes versus coverage routes would be, more like running the 49 all the time. So that would come, down to East Lacey and kind of to Town Hall and come back up and maybe cover a larger area, but maybe not run quite as frequently. So this is, given the same amount of service hours, the same amount of time you're using a bus, you're either using it more frequently on a few routes or using it more sparingly on several routes. And so that's kind of the balance. And we saw, generally a preference on ridership, and this was consistent with some of the results that we saw at the metro level. They shared some of their results with us as well. I think they had something like 2,000 responses and a lot of comments. So it was interesting to see that. And then we got a lot of great feedback here as well about some specific areas similar to the location base. So yeah, if you have a chance, check that out. I'll note that basically, as I said, this goes into both. This kind of starts the conversation of what Fitchburg would need to do from a complementary service perspective. It also helped inform Metro on where they should focus their ridership and coverage routes. Last week they looked at those, and so I can certainly share those as they kind of become more publicly ready. There's kind of rough sketches at this point, but I'll note that ridership routes, as I mentioned, are Fish down to Cahill and Caddis, and kind of a route that would go down to Target, kind of along the Verona Road frontage roads, and then go up. And so both of those would be service that would be high frequency, 15 to 30-minute minutes in between routes, headways, and would go straight directly into the campus and downtown. And so that would be kind of a direct route that would be, high frequency, really convenient for folks who would want to use it. And then the question would be, if they built that sort of a system, how would we get folks there? Would we start talking about parking rides? Would we start talking about, shared ride taxi? circulator bus, that sort of thing. So we would maybe have to think about how we would complement that sort of service. Whereas the coverage routes looked a little bit more similar to what we have now, similar to the 40, similar to the 16, but kind of looping down. So I'm happy to show those as soon as they're kind of ready for public consumption. It's nice to have kind of some of the background documents of how they came up and some of the explanation before we kind of make them more publicly available. So that will probably come in the next month or two as I work more with Metro on that. But yeah, any questions?
Is that document that you just showed us, do we have that, or we can find that online, I suppose, or can we get it emailed to us?
Yeah, I will just pull that up. Oops. I'm glad you guys can't see my screen right now because I'm just not typing well. All right. So if you just pop in Transit Fitchburg, it brings you to the, I'm sure this is just my Google, but
Okay.
one of the main pages would be public transportation services.
Okay.
And then on that, I just added a link here. So I just changed the text to let folks be able to check that out. And the Metro sponsored survey is still open, but just note that, the ship is kind of sailed. They start making their networks, and they're going to make 3, I'll note, a coverage, a ridership, and something that's kind of basically existing with a few tweaks of just if they, we're kind of doing a hands-off approach, what that would look like. And between those 3, they'll have a report that will kind of show like the extremes, I guess, of they're certainly not recommending any one of those. It's kind of what combinations of those would make the most sense. And so all of those are kind of budget neutral of using the same service hours they're using right now, but in different ways. And so, yeah, I think it'll be really interesting for folks to weigh in on once those are ready.
Is this earlier in January or so, we were introduced to something called the Transit Options Study was being to be done. Is that what does this constitute what was then referred to as the Transit Options Study? Is that the same thing?
I believe so. Certainly the Metro, I know now they're calling it the Metro Network Redesign. I don't know if that was the same.
We talked about a Fitchburg Transit
Right.
Options Study, but this is what we have. There's not an additional. Is that what that is? Is that?
Yeah, not yet. So again, we release a survey to try to start the like Fitchburg specific conversation, and then I think I'm awaiting kind of what we see from Metro in terms of how much will that work. Knowing that that's kind of our existing service, how will that work for us?
Okay.
Knowing that through this public process, and I guess the results of that would kind of dictate what else we would need, or if we want to go to our own independent service.
Okay, and just to maybe it's total dead issue, but Gabriella, could you tell me? I know at one point there was talk in the council about Fitchburg developing its own public transit system, and that seems to have just died with the expiration of our city administrator's term. Is that a total dead letter, or is that at any place in anybody's thought process?
I would say it's totally undecided at this point. I think that there was some discussion last year because it was looking like we were going to get a significant spike in prices.
Yeah.
Like this year or maybe the following year. It looks like we have a little bit more runway because of more federal funding that's come in to Metro, which is being distributed to the partners. And
Okay.
so we have probably a few years, I don't know, Andrew, I would say 3 to 5 years where we probably aren't going to see a very large increase, or rather, I would say an increase that we can probably accommodate in the budget. So I think the conversations around what we might have to do have become a little bit less urgent.
Okay.
However, I still think that they're it's quite important to have those conversations now so that we're not blindsided. I would like to do a committee of the whole meeting, or half a committee of the whole meeting dedicated to public transit sometime in the near future. And I'm going to be talking to Council President Randy Udall about that. So I will let you know if we get something scheduled, because I'd love for the TTC to come and attend and participate.
Okay.
But yeah, that's And also, I also just wanted to say too, I looked it up quickly. Metro Transit still does have a survey up on their website currently, and they call it the Transit Choices Survey. So that is still up and available.
It's still up there. I guess I'm just cautioning folks. I don't want to say it's, they won't look at it, but they already have started developing their network. So
It's less
there's-
relevant at this
yep,
point.
exactly. And I'll just note as well. So this is kind of on the services side that I was presenting and kind of what folks need. Similarly on the cost side that Gabriella was referencing, we have a meeting on the 25th. Staff does with Metro Transit to have kind of we've been getting kind of back and forth with what potential options a renegotiation of a contract would look like to kind of keep stabilize costs. I know that was a big concern in the past of kind of that fluctuation in cost and some of the other aspects that I mentioned previously. So I guess we'll get a more refined proposal at that meeting or maybe the next meeting. So I would say at the next meeting of the TTC, I should have that for you guys to check out. So I'm definitely anticipating that. I think that's going to be a real question of the viability of Metro as a real partner with us and like a good service provider. How viable that is based upon the cost and really again they're trying to leverage that large influx of federal funds to kind of smooth things out and reduce costs, but also leverage that to be able to keep partners in the system for as long as possible because they'll hold on to that money basically.
Andrew, Troy, will there be effectively two budgets, one for the new rapid bus transit system and the other one for the, what I will call for lack of a name, the old current system? Or are they is there gonna be one pot that Fitchburg will contribute to?
I see. That's a good question. So I believe that the BRT that's specifically within Madison will be fully paid for by them. So we're not subsidizing that BRT. I think that's the west line that you're referring to. So that's gonna be the first phase, and I'm not sure exactly when the south phase, the Park Street to Fish Hatchery would be implemented. But I know that that's subsequent to that first phase, and that's being paid for by Metro.
That's my understanding as well. I've been in meetings with Metro as well, and they said that BRT costs are not being passed along to partners that are not being served by BRT.
Okay,
Awesome.
All right. Thank you for that summary, Andrew. I forgot I was the chairman for a second. I think we're going to move on to the next item, unless there's an objection. Resolution R6121. And just a point of information for me, I've seen different cross sections now. The resolution we're looking at is to approve the original design that you had developed, or is it remind me, is it one of the subsequent versions?
Yeah, so forgive me on this one because this is a little interesting. So I presented a staff memo to you guys back at our last TCC, and similarly to the Board of Public Works. We updated that memo based upon some of the feedback we heard from you and the Board of Public Works and provided that to council. So what you're seeing in the packet is that same memo we provided to council at last month's council meeting, just forwarded on for these meetings, like they deferred it. And so we're just kind of referring it back to you. I'll note that I have some supplementary information that we learned based upon what everybody wanted. So I wasn't able to include in the packet because that just got kind of redirected to you. But I plan to kind of go through that to answer some of your questions, I guess. But to answer your original question, it's the two cross sections you see are the two that you saw, I believe, in the original memo. And certainly in the original memo to council, and that shows the first in figure 1, that's the February 17th cross section, the original one that was presented to the public. And in figure 2 is the staff recommended cross-section. That's what's actually included in the resolution. And so that, I included both to kind of give you a reference of, here's what we originally had, here's kind of how we toned it down as kind of a compromise between some of the interest of trying to make sure that we're keeping costs down and keeping the footprint down. And I'll note that, I can go through kind of a presentation to answer some questions and then that we had in the past, and then talk a little bit to kind of what some options to modify this. This being kind of a compromise between high end, original design and a low end of the bare minimum. This is I kind of have some features that we could say, an a la carte menu, if you will, of what items do you want to add in or take out, kind of on a case by case basis. So with that, if I can just kind of dive into
Yes.
that.
Would you please go ahead?
We already took action on this specific resolution, so I'm just clarifying that this is just a discussion item for TTC. We're not taking action on this because we already voted on it last meeting.
That's a great question.
I think
I'm not
it's-
sure. I know that council deferred, so I don't know if that means I don't know why it was referred back to you guys, other than that maybe it was with this new information, if you guys would make a different decision, I'm not sure. But if not, it can be just for review.
It's more
Are
of a
you saying the council, the committee of the whole made a decision on this?
The only committee that made a decision was us. We're the only committee that voted. Public Works deferred, council deferred.
Yeah, I thought we deferred until the next meeting, or was it to a specific date?
I think that's correct.
No, we voted.
We voted it down though, didn't we?
Wait, I'm sorry. I couldn't hear that.
The TTC voted 4-3 against,
Yeah.
Right.
and Public
It
Works
says it on
did
the
not
referral
take a
sheet
vote.
as well for within the packet.
So-
Transit.
And so I apologize, I'm a little confused still. Is there a specific, there must be, Gabrielle, you're saying this is just a discussion item.
Yes.
Is it our choice to have a further discussion? Has the council asked us to have a further discussion? What does the council want from us at this point?
I honestly, for me personally, because I will be representing TTC at council on May 25th, I think it would be interesting to hear your input on these new decisions that have been made. So if we do discuss it, I will take that into consideration. And I can communicate what we discussed at council. So
Okay.
I do think it's worthwhile to discuss it. I just wanted to clarify that we're not taking action
Okay.
because we've already voted on this particular.
So we're gonna have a discussion of options,
But
and you're gonna carry that forward to the council.
Just so I'm clear, this resolution is identical to the one that was presented in April?
Yes.
I believe the
Well,
referral,
Yeah, if it's identical and we've already voted it down, then there's no reason to bring it back up.
yeah, I agree. The packet has the or the committee or commission referral dated April 13th, and our meeting last time was the 14th. So I think you're right. There's nothing changed, and the information in the packet doesn't show anything really new. I was going to ask what are we actually looking at, because this is the same stuff as last month, right?
Right.
So maybe, I don't know. I don't think we can do anything since there's nothing new.
Yeah, there's
Well,
nothing new in the packet because that was just re-referred, right? I didn't really have anything to do with that, but I do have some new information based on the questions you guys asked that I could review if you want to. Otherwise,
All
we
right.
can move on.
Let's do that. Let's understand that this is a discussion, not an action item. That whatever we say and discuss will be carried forward or summarized, represented by Gabriella to the council as they take action. And having said that, Andrew, why don't you give us the new information you have and maybe just recap a little, summarize a little bit what the options are and what the issues are.
Yeah. So I'll share my screen. I'll try to keep this brief, but I'm definitely, I want to give you guys a chance to re-evaluate based on new information, but again, not vote, right? But as we mentioned, cool. So so we have a few things. So certainly the expanded tree survey. So last time we met, we had kind of a partial tree survey. Our tree surveyor went out and measured 30 feet on either side of the existing roadway, but noting that we're kind of moving the roadway alignment and that the grading limits are much further than that, up to 160 feet in some locations, that, we wanted to get that expanded area by the quarry. So we did that. We also looked at retaining wall benefits and costs. We looked at the cost of rough grading the sidewalk, and we have some rough costs of all of those options that I'll show you kind of the a la carte menu. And then we also looked at some street tree clustering. And, again, this isn't necessarily typical section stuff, but certainly something to keep in mind, and as well as the permanent pavement. Not something that we necessarily need to specify in a resolution, but something to keep in mind that you guys brought up. And then something, a request from council was kind of existing cross sections of Lacey, just kind of reviewing those and what we're seeing in different areas. So with that, I'll kind of jump into it. So the expanded tree survey. Bruce Allison went out and measured all trees that were 6 inches in diameter or more. He surveyed 147 new trees. This was in, so he surveyed roughly 140 trees in 2014 for the Corey Vista development in this area. He went back last weekend, and surveyed 147 trees in this area. So now between kind of these 3 surveys, the Teresa survey where we originally had done 30 feet on either side of the existing corridor, and these 2 additional areas, I feel pretty comfortable that we have surveyed the corridor for trees. We had something like 300 trees. And so this kind of gives a shot of what that original 2014 tree survey looked like. And you'll note that a lot of high value trees, so oaks, hackberries, hickories. So the majority of those are in this area are high value trees. Similarly, in the new area surveyed last weekend, same type of thing. So we're seeing that at least the majority of trees are high value, though the condition does vary between dead to good. But so I'll just note that we did kind of some preliminary numbers, and basically based upon the updated tree survey that I can pull up, we were seeing roughly 13 tree delta, if you will. And so I can pull that up. So basically between the grading limits of that originally proposed February 17th design and the staff recommended, or I guess actually the minimum design of a 28-foot cross section, we saw roughly a 20 tree delta, and that's between the 2 grading limits of those 2 designs.
And I'm sorry, what does that mean? 20 new trees were found?
No, sorry. What I mean by that is that basically there would be 20 more trees lost with the original design versus the bare minimum design that we kind of worked with the advisory group to define. So I can kind of show you what I mean by that. So if I zoom in into this area, so this is really the kind of area of impact that we had new trees surveyed. So I can, and so really what we're talking about is the difference between this green line, which is kind of the bare minimum design, a 28-foot cross section, and the orange line, which is what we originally, so the kind of bookends of kind of the high end design and the low end design. And so you can see, there's a relatively small buffer between these areas because we're only talking about, a few feet, 6 feet or so of roadway width, but and so, to be expected, there's not a whole lot of trees in that area, but we want to make sure, and there's a lot of benefits to having a tree survey of just understanding what the trees are out there and what the impact is, so we can take that into account in our design of what we're doing. And oh, is there a question?
I'm sorry, I shouldn't just jump in, I suppose.
No worries.
Why aren't those lines parallel to the center of the roadway?
Yeah, and so they follow the contours. So you can kind of see these gray lines are the contour. So, they might go up the slope or down the slope depending upon kind of what the existing road contour is, knowing that we have to kind of meet a common grade here, if that makes sense. So, so yeah, it's really just following kind of the slope of the hillside. So,
Andrew,
Yep.
would you mind zooming out? I would just love to see this section in comparison to the size of those two gravel quarries, the one on the top, the one on the north and one on the south.
yeah, unfortunately, I don't have.
We can't zoom that far out.
Yeah, it kind of cuts off the window. But yeah, you can start to see the quarry here in this aerial. So, and this is the existing quarry vista. So, I mean, so yeah, to give you some perspective, I mean, there's still definitely some area north of this that it will be left undisturbed. I can certainly have an aerial that kind of shows that. We just kind of clipped it here to keep it small. But I highlighted kind of the three main areas of difference. And so within those, this cloud, and this cloud, we counted roughly 20 trees. And so, that's what or 13, and we kind of round up to 20. So the delta that we're kind of projecting is roughly 20 trees would be lost. And so really, we want to verify this to make sure we were kind of doing our due diligence. In this case, we're really not seeing, I guess the long and short of it is that we're really not seeing a whole lot of impact in terms of cross-sectional elements that we include on the trees adjacent to the roadway near the quarry. And so I guess now I kind of feel more comfortable saying that there's negligible impact for some of these cross-sectional elements. Now, certainly there could be impacts and larger impacts if we're talking about retaining walls, that sort of thing. But as I'll kind of mention before in a little bit, that there are some significant costs that are associated with that. And so we kind of have to weigh that. So any questions on this before I move on to retaining walls?
Andrew, this is Troy. I'm puzzled as if there is going to be a retaining wall in the design on the north side, why the right-of-way has to be so large on the north in the forested area.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I can certainly move on to retaining wall stuff if you guys are ready for that. And so that option that was showing you didn't include a retaining wall. So that was, the two kind of more fully designed or to 30 to 60%, and it takes a lot of effort to do that. So we just kind of want to do like a kind of a Cadillac and a Pinto or something, kind of bookend the options that you would see actually on the design. And then we can kind of get a little bit more in the weeds on some of these specific options. We can kind of do a sensitivity analysis versus doing a full design. So with that, I'll kind of note that we looked at two different retaining wall types. I am not a geotech engineer. I don't pretend to be one. And so we kind of leveraged what we had done previously on Fitchburg Road with a 450-foot long wall. So similar, perhaps maybe half the size that we're talking about here with a roughly 1,100-foot wall. And so we looked at two options: the modular block gravity wall on the post and panel wall. And so both of those we're looking at something like $85 to $100 per square foot. And I'll note that these two projects do not totally match up. We're talking about Fish really had kind of level ground on the backside of it. So we haven't really designed these yet. These are just kind of preliminary cost estimates based upon the number of square foot we need and the known kind of cost per square foot that we had at Fish. So I'll say this is very preliminary, just kind of give you a ballpark. And so yeah, we were kind of assuming what would a 10-foot wall over this roughly 1,100-foot area be. And so you can see these aren't insignificant numbers. There could be some savings in reduced earthwork. Some of that excavation wouldn't have to be done if obviously if we had a wall. And I'll kind of show you what that cross section could look like. So this is what we had shown before. This is what's those 14-foot travel lanes. And so this would be kind of the that same option, except I can blow this up a little bit more. So this is the curb and gutter. You can see 120 feet kind of from the median out. So all that would need to be regraded in order to fit that. Whereas if you did a retaining wall, and we had this retaining wall, I think roughly 16 feet, maybe 17 feet north of the existing shared use path or the proposed shared use path, that would save, a good like 40 feet of cut into that hill, but it would come at the expense of 800,000 plus basically. And we talked a little bit about design in the advisory group, of kind of why this is what it is. Why can't we move just the retaining wall directly up 2 feet off with shy distance from the shared use path? That could be an option. I'll note that it's very flat on this hill, despite, it's a hill going sideways. It's not necessarily a hill going down until you get to Commerce. And so because it's so flat and we'll have a ton of water coming off of this hill down, that we want to capture that and kind of send it to two different places on either side of this kind of flat portion of the hill, so that we don't have to have an inlet, every 50 feet or so that we would, because the ground's so flat, and to prevent localized ponding, we would have to do that. So basically, to save money on an inlet every 20 to 50 feet, we would put in the swale, which would still have some impacts to grading. And so I think there's some options to not do that, but that would come with increased cost. And really, I guess my big takeaway from this is it does do something, and it does potentially save 60 trees is kind of the high end that we were looking at. If we basically assume all trees 10, 15 feet north of the shared use path in our design up to the grading limits would be saved. So just to kind of give you a sense of what I'm talking about here. So if we kind of look at, in our design, here's our shared use path. If we count, everything kind of north of 10 feet up to the grading limits, we count all those trees up. That would be roughly 60. A lot of these trees are very much kind of centralized on our proposed corridor. So we really wouldn't, we would be killing those no matter what, unless we can shift the whole corridor south, which, may possibly be an option, but we probably can't shift it enough to make it real dent. So in that case, we're talking about roughly 60 trees. The valuation of those 60 trees to equal 800,000 would be roughly 13,000 per tree. And I just don't think that, I mean, we could certainly talk about and discuss the merits of those trees, but I just think from that cost perspective, and knowing that that wall would have to be in a permanent easement, or we would have to buy that land versus a temporary easement where we wouldn't, and knowing that we would have to maintain that wall until at least the area was redeveloped and it was regraded, or forever. I would say that's pretty significant cost for a number of trees. We're talking about planting something like 270 trees on this corridor. 60 trees, we could probably factor in and plant at least half of those new trees versus a retaining wall for a dramatic reduction in costs. So at this point, I'm not recommending putting in a retaining wall or kind of assessing that further. And I'll note that it's not hugely relevant for kind of the cross-sectional decision, if you will. I mean, it all kind of factors in of like, is that going to be an option? Is that something we should consider? That sort of thing. But just, I guess, knowing the costs, I wouldn't recommend that benefit outweighs the cost, but that's not my call. So I just want to share it with you. In my professional opinion, it doesn't make sense, but.
Okay. Are there any comments at this point for Andrew?
I've got a question. I just want to make sure I heard you right. So you're recommending no retaining wall at all?
At this point, it doesn't seem like it would be cost efficient. There could be some options for it somewhere if there was like a particular place, but based on preliminary cost, it doesn't seem to outweigh the negatives of having to buy that land and pay for a retaining wall.
Andrew, Troy, has the landowners on the north side expressed any development plans or intent or preferences in this issue?
Yes, that's Payne Dolan. And I would say that, so they have quarry rights for, I believe, 10 more years. And And so at that point, they could potentially redevelop that in some sort of reclamation process. And I believe, it gets a little gray. There's some conservancy land that was, dedicated from the quarry that they wouldn't quarry this area. We don't know, with CARPC and kind of designating that as a green space, we don't know if that would kind of maintain into that development time. I know it was designated as green space in the North Stoner Prairie neighborhood plan. So there's certainly a possibility that that this area would be a future park. But I would say that little is known about kind of the area north of that and kind of what that. I mean, I would say certainly Corey Vista has plans to expand specifically adjacent to the roadway. Less is known, I would say.
Okay, Andrew, did you have more you wanted to give us?
Yeah, I have a few more things that I could just kind of run over. So, so this kind of gives a quick kind of comparison. So, before I wasn't really comfortable saying how many trees we were going to remove. Now I feel a little bit more comfortable doing that. So, this 270 trees is assuming trees every 40 feet. We can certainly do more clustering options like this that, what we did on Fayette Glen that would allow, more of a natural type street tree versus, just kind of soldiers in a row. So there could be additional options to plant more trees, but, you can see that, on net balance, we're talking about still adding more trees than we're removing probably. So, I feel like from a tree loss perspective, though it is not the same, and I can't argue that it is the new trees versus the old. I think on net, kind of long term, that we'll have more trees than we do currently in this cross-sectional footprint. Cost, we did update this number a little bit. And I'll be updating that in the packet. There was an error in one of the spreadsheets, and we were kind of using old assumptions on based upon the cost share. So that number is a little bit higher versus what you guys saw before. And so this number, I think it was like 650,000. Now it's 475. And so that has gone down. The kind of the difference between the Cadillac and the Pinto has gone down. And so, I just want to reflect that. And then this staff recommendation, I didn't have that specific last time. So, we kind of split the difference to some degree based upon knowing that, we're adding 2 more feet of roadway width. And so that adds roughly $100,000 more to the project and adds a little bit more runoff. But we don't assume that any more trees are going to be removed more or less than the original design.
So the runoff difference is attributable to the width of the roadway.
Exactly. Yep. And any impervious surfaces, so shared use path or roadway, yep, or sidewalk. So with that, so we also have the south side sidewalk grading. There's a comment in the advisory group of what that would cost, and so we did the calculation there, and I will kind of I'll refer back to this number when I talk below. Here's the permanent pavement. So we're certainly looking at this specifically on the east side of our corridor. It doesn't work great on hilly surfaces. So basically, I don't know how much you guys know about permanent pavement, but there's this kind of porous asphalt or concrete or pavers. But below it is a stone reservoir. So this is kind of like open graded rock that allows for that water to just really seep right in versus kind of a more closed form, closed structure that we would typically do in our base. And so, the water kind of comes down and fills this reservoir up just like a bathtub underneath kind of a layer of surface. And that, this layer does drain after 72 hours. That's the intention, or minimum 72 hours. But it, kind of soaks it up like a sponge and then slowly drains it out. Offers some of that kind of rate control that you would get from and some of the kind of purifying that you would get from a wet pond. But it doesn't work great on slopes because, as you can imagine, if you had several of these as you were going down a hill and you started to basically drain that bathtub, it would just run down to the hill and wouldn't really have its retention qualities. So we would recommend this just on the kind of eastern extents east of Commerce Park once you get down the hill. So its use would be relatively minor. I have some benefits and disadvantages that we can talk about. And the cost is the main thing. We could probably run a street sweeper over it and twice a year, like the DNR recommends. And so that should, clean it out and actually preserve that kind of permeable effect. It does come with roughly a 20% increase in construction costs. So, it's a fairly small path. We're talking about, 8 to 12 feet of path here in width. So, that doesn't add up to a whole lot. So it's certainly something to think about and something you guys brought up. So I want to, reference it. And we do already have some out there in Quarry Vista in the neighborhood on Fitchburg Road and kind of coming around up the hill. And with that, last things. So here's a few examples of Lacey Road existing cross sections. So just east of Seminole Highway. I just want to show its total pavement width. I'll also talk a little bit about Sherry's Path where we have it. But, so in this case, just east of our project corridor, we're talking about a 32-foot cross section. So in all these options, when we've been talking, 28, 30, 34, they're all fairly similar, if not smaller than what we're seeing directly adjacent to this roadway. And so really, I think I would just want to kind of caution folks when we're thinking specifically about bike lane width, please try to keep in mind what that adjacent lane is, what that width is well. In this case, we have like something like 3-foot shoulders that maybe feel comfortable, but that overall kind of lane plus shoulder is 16 feet, right? So it's a 13-foot lane, 12 to 13-foot lane with a 3 to 4-foot shoulder. That feels a little bit more comfortable than a 10-foot travel lane with a 5-foot bike lane. So, and then, working further east, so in between Richardson and Osmondson, it actually goes up quite a bit. We have curb and gutter, we have a parking lane, we have a bike lane on both sides. And so we're looking at more like 44 feet. So much larger than anything we're talking about here in terms of total kind of curb to curb width. And then we're moving further east, we're seeing a smaller, and so this is the most recent addition. So this is kind of west of Fayette Glen. And so in this stretch, we're looking at 34 feet. So that has, I believe, 10-foot travel lanes, 2-foot buffers, 4-foot on-street, asphalt pavement, and then 1-foot gutter. And so, that's 34 feet. I'll note that there's also a 10-foot path directly adjacent to that. So that, really, that was kind of where we started with. We added some medians in, and now we've kind of, we've had a few different versions, but I think initially the design kind of started with what we did in East Lacey, thinking that went through a pretty good vetting process. So with that, are there any questions? No, I'll jump to my last slide.
Are there any questions for Andrew? Now we have two, Jay and Sue have asked to speak on this. See, what time is it now? We have somebody reminded me in a note here that we sometimes limit speakers to 3 minutes. I'm not going to do that because I want you to say your piece, but Jay, I would ask for you and Sue to be concise. We have a fair amount of written material from you, and you understand that we're not going to be acting or taking a vote on this tonight. So why don't I ask Jay to go ahead and give us your thoughts.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to be here tonight. I will try to keep my remarks as short as possible. I would like to confirm once again that this is not an action item. It was not, when the council postponed this item, if you look at the minutes of the council meeting on April 27th, this item was postponed by unanimous vote. Interestingly enough, it was not referred back to this body or to Public Works, but be that as it may, I appreciate the fact that this is just an informational item. There's a number of things that Andrew went over. I appreciate all the background that he has provided. I have a couple of clarification questions, if that would be allowable for the purposes of making sure everybody understands the graphics that he displayed here earlier in his presentation. I think they're extremely helpful.
Yes,
And,
please go ahead with your questions.
okay, the two lines on the map showing the grading limits, there is not a third line that shows the grading limit for the staff recommendation in R6121. Is that correct, Andrew? Neither of those, that orange line and that red line, the grading limits on the north side at the Quarry Access Road intersection, those actually are not the grading limit for the proposal that's embodied in R6121, which is the last page of the material that was provided to this commission.
Yep, that's right. So that proposed cross-section is basically in between those two lines because
Okay.
it's not as big or as small as the other two.
Okay, great. Now, with respect to, and if you could leave this graphic up, what is displayed there is two 10-foot traffic lanes with no on-street bike lanes, correct?
That's right. Yep, 28
And-
foot.
And that MUP is either 10 or 12 or somewhere, I think maybe it's actually 12, but whatever, that's and there's some sort of a median between MUP, multi-use path, and the roadway. The other thing that's interesting here is there's some fairly significant medians shown there. And is it also correct that what has not been evaluated yet is that if you added some on-street bike facilities, whether they're 3, 4, or 5 feet, and either compress that median or remove that, and also, so essentially, if you compress the width of this back to something like, this is not a 32-foot cross-section here, including the MUP. This is more like, I don't know the exact number, but it's over 50 feet easily. And the point of the retaining wall is to try to get this compressed as much as possible to thereby allow these grading limits in conjunction with the retaining wall to minimize the footprint and the loss of habitat and trees. Now, and I realize that it'll take some money to do that. And these estimates that were provided are generic estimates. There's two separate types of construction for a retaining wall. And the estimates in that chart that you provided are not an estimate of what it would cost to place a retaining wall on this site if this footprint was compressed more. And this gets back to the bottom line. Our interest in this project is to try to minimize the cost and minimize the footprint. And I think staff has started off in the right direction. There's a lot of information that's been provided. But there's a lot of information still missing. And I guess as a member of the public, I don't understand why the city would be making a commitment to now it's 5.9 million or whatever number you just showed, and thank you for that update. I just don't understand it. You know, it's your call, you're the elected officials, but why would the city make a commitment to a $6 million project until they understood what these options are and whether or not maybe it is cost effective to put a retaining wall in here if we can compress this somewhat more. Now, I realize there's a point we can't go below, and that's obviously a point of discussion, but this is not necessarily a typical cross-section, but this is the one where probably there's the most, what would you say, disruption to the existing environment. And so this is, you know, we don't want to be harping on these things, but conversely, it just seems like for a little bit more time and attention, we could get a better answer to whether or not something similar to this, but somewhat different in conjunction with a retaining wall would actually significantly alter that footprint, because we don't have the grading limits shown if there was an 8-foot retaining wall in the other part that was made here that I think is critical to understand, this issue of why that cross-section, there was a cross-section shown I think in this area, that had a drainage swale between the retaining wall and the north side of the MUP. And there was a fairly significant distance. And the reason stated for doing it that way is it was costly to put in more inlets. Well, I would really appreciate seeing that analysis because I do not understand how a few more inlets, and after all, if the retaining wall is brought closer, the runoff is going to be lower because there's not as much draining into that area. And there's a lot of places around town where you can see retaining walls and inlets in close proximity to other either road right away or pedestrian right away. So this is our issue. We've started this 2 months ago. We've asked for this information. We have some of it, but we don't have much of it. And for the council to make a decision on a $6 million project just seems, I'm not questioning anybody's competence or their ability to look into these things. What I'm questioning is the direction that would be necessary to do this evaluation. Now, there's a couple of other things that everybody needs to realize about this project. The consultant who is doing this work is not directly accountable to Fitchburg. They were hired by Promega under a development agreement that was signed over a year ago between Fitchburg and Promega. And maybe there's other projects out there where a private entity was responsible for a major upgrade to a road like this, but I'd like to find out where they are, and maybe Andrew, you can look into it and talk to Michael Zimmerman about it. But this seems to be a fairly unique arrangement here. And one of the vibes that we're getting from this project is when we ask these detailed questions, the answers don't come back. And it's either because somebody doesn't want to spend the money to get the answers, or because this is preordained. This design could have been, and I realize there was some modifications made when this was first unveiled on February 17th at a public information meeting. Yes, there was some changes made to this since then. They're basically captured in an April 12th memo from staff that was subsequently upgraded to further explain what's going on in a memo dated April 26th. That's all well and good. It's a matter of record. But the real question is, where did the design come from on February 17th? How much of that was done in advance? And it was done by a consultant to Promega. It was not done by the city of Fitchburg consultant directly. Now, I realize that the development agreement has provisions that allow the city of Fitchburg to provide input, but that's still a different arrangement. And the resistance to getting answers to our questions is just troubling.
Okay, Jay.
And I'll leave it at that.
Okay, Jay, I'm not cutting you off, but I did want to just a comment at that point. It's getting a little beyond our ability to discuss those issues of who developed the plan and where to come from and how it should have been done. But I did want to see if Andrew wanted to respond on that point.
Sure. Yeah. And so, as you guys know, I'm relatively new, so some of this stuff certainly predates me. But from my understanding, and this is definitely indicated in the staff memo, that I guess the original design evolved from what occurred, what was the final design on East Lacey. I think the logic was, that went through a fairly robust public process. I know that the East Fitchburg Neighborhood Association was very much involved in that. They had some regular meetings. I know this is not the same corridor, and so to just say that that's going to directly work isn't true. But I think that was a good starting point to say it's the same road, or same collector roadway, and that we could start there and kind of go from there. And so I think that was kind of the intention. I'll certainly say we reviewed the 60% the first day I got here. So the city's been reviewing 60%, 75%. All of our comments we pass directly on to this consultant, and they apply them. So I know it's tough because it is a unique relationship of kind of the way that we structure this. But at the end of the day, the city staff who's reviewing these plans are the ones who are instructing the consultant what to do. The actual administration of the contract is done through Promega. They're paying the bills currently, but the consultants are beholden to us, and they've answered a bunch of questions and then gotten more questions after that, and then gotten more questions after that. And we can certainly go through all that, but I think that they've definitely responded. I'm glad to work with them, and they've been great to kind of help us out. Just know that typically these are tricky because we don't want to put the cart before the horse. We don't want to design this same roadway 4, 5, 6 times with different because every time we do that, every time you see lines on these maps, it takes a full reconstruction of this corridor. It's not just a quick and easy thing. We're talking about days of work. And so we like to, keep that. That was kind of the justification for why we wanted big and small, and say, here's our kind of sensitivity analysis. If it doesn't make a big difference between the biggest and the smallest, maybe it doesn't really make that much sense to do any more, and we can just, I guess, have council decide what they want to see in the roadway versus kind of worrying too much about the potential impacts of a tree here or there, that sort of thing. And so I guess that's kind of what we're left off. And hopefully that answer most of your questions, Jay. Let me know.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. I appreciate that response. And Jay, I'm going to ask you to move on with, I think you might have had 1 or 2 more points to want to make, but your concerns there are noted. And I think we'll have to leave it at that as far as that point you made. Is there more you wanted to add? On
Well,
other concerns?
I'd like to thank Andrew for providing additional background on the relationship with the consultant. I would just leave with one bottom line question is, we've asked for this detailed evaluation of an alternative, and so far it hasn't been conducted, and I guess we'll find out on May 25th if the council is going to move forward with what they have, or they're going to ask for more information.
Okay.
But again, to just confirm, this is an informational item. This committee is not amending any previous
Right.
recommendation they've made. Okay, thank you very much. I
That is
appreciate
correct.
the extra time.
Thank you, Jay, for taking your time. And Sue, did you want to add to that?
Well, I would like to say I agree with Jay's efforts to try to get information. And while it may seem that there's questions being added over and over and over again, from a perspective of a citizen trying to learn about this, once a person or a group learns a chunk of information that they have never heard before, but city staff knows or engineers for Promega know, that begets another set of questions. We're not operating with the same amount of information. So when it comes to us piecemeal, our clarifying thoughts come back piecemeal. So I hope people understand it's not an effort to just be a thorn in somebody's side. It's a group of people who want to understand why this has developed as it has and why there cannot be efforts to make it have more preservation of the existing flora along the way. One of the big questions I have still is, why is the entire footprint of the road shifted north as it is? That seems to, the further north it's shifted, or the wider it is, the more of the hillside and trees you lose. So if Andrew can explain some of that, I'd appreciate it.
Okay, why don't we, Andrew, why don't you take on that question, and then when you're done responding, I'll ask other commission members if they have comments at this time.
Yeah, so I believe that is a vestige of some of the early work that we did. And so from my understanding, some of the concern early on was that the driveways on the south side, we want to try to minimize those impacts as much as possible, knowing specifically, Hammersley, that there's a lot of grade issues there, and that some of the residences, we want to make sure that we're minimizing impacts, and knowing that Promega was on the north side and that they were redeveloping, and that, that land would be, a portion of that would be dedicated to us. That made sense. There certainly is an option both here at the quarry and, sorry, I'm pointing to my screen, and over, further on the east side, to try to kind of change that horizontal alignment, to try to minimize that as much as possible. I guess the rationale we're trying to, the design team's trying to stress is that there's relatively few impacts in terms of cross-sectional elements that change the effect. And so if we can kind of hone in on one that we feel comfortable that, like, the council feels that that is something that, that has the features of this roadway that the city wants, then we could certainly design that and kind of redesign it and try to understand what we can do at these two, like specifically, uh, trouble spots that we can try to minimize our impacts as much as possible. But we don't want to do that with 3 different designs and with retaining walls and with a lot of different sensitivity analysis. And so we're trying to kind of limit our options so that we can play with the things that actually might matter. If that makes sense.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Andrew. And Sue and Jay, I do appreciate your coming and sharing your ideas here. But I think now we can turn and see if any of the commissioners have a comment before we move on to the next agenda item.
None here.
Okay. Here's a thought that's going through my head, and I just want to share this. It has to do with our mandate or our job as commissioners. Would it be appropriate for us to confine our deliberations in the future to transportation issues? That's not to say that the environmental issues or the runoff and the trees are not important, but I'm not sure that that's our place to make those judgments. Would it be reasonable for us to say, the question to us are about transportation? Does one plan or another adequately address transportation needs? And then respecting all the concerns that have been raised by Jay and Susan and all of the petitioners, let the council or other commissions, so we have a tree committee and so on, that can talk about those things. I'm just not sure that we're not getting a little bit beyond our mandate to be discussing environmental concerns in addition to simple transportation issues. I'd appreciate some thought on that from other commissioners.
This is Troy. I think transportation involves a lot of modes: walking, bicycling. A lot of these items have to do with and how roads are laid out. In the end, if it's an engineering question, then that's purely public works, I guess, in a way. But I think it makes sense to address things that impact the city environmentally that affect how we use transportation. I mean, there's no committee that has to deal with the environment in the city. And a lot of transportation activities by nature involve the environment and, the city bike paths and so forth. The city tries to is made itself known as the city of trees, bicycling and so forth. So I don't think we want to exclude it. I think it makes sense to, when you make decisions that involve transportation, to take into account the aesthetics. Remember when we did the first bridge over McKee Road, I was part of a group on the commission at the time that advocated making sure that instead of having those 2 sections that are open on each side, the city engineer proposed that they be closed. And I said, my thought, which was shared by a majority of the commission at the time, was that the aesthetic considerations as a gateway to the city merited the city spending a little bit more money for something that would outlast us all into the future. So I think a lot of transportation decisions, you can do brutalist style, or you can do something that will look good and last for the future. So I don't think you can necessarily separate the two. And if it makes sense to me to address an issue
Okay,
for transportation based on the
Sorry,
aesthetics,
any
I
other
think we should.
comments on my thought that we might try to narrow our discussions on something like this?
I had asked Darren when I first joined the committee, like, what is the purview of this committee? and he sent me the state statute. And the state statute basically says, the establishment of a transit committee is to look over mass transit, like the bus routes, public transit, and not have anything to do with roads. But it does say that if the Common Council wants to delegate more responsibility to the commission, it can. So I guess it's kind of really up to the Common Council if they want the commission looking at this stuff or not, or just sticking to mass transit. That's my opinion.
Okay.
But if
Yeah,
you're going to look at roads, I think you got to look at everything, the environmental impact, and, you
Right.
can't just look specifically at the road,
All right.
in my opinion.
I just shared the summary of duties just for reference. That's why I'm sharing my screen.
Oh, summary. All right, well, we could leave it at that. Thank you, Gabriella. So any other thoughts on this item, the Lacey Road proposal? If not, we'll move on to the next agenda item, which is Resolution R 9221. Now, is this an action item or a discussion item?
As an action item.
Okay. Could you present that, summarize that for us, Andrew?
Sure. So let me share my screen. All right. So this is the agreement. And so I guess the kind of main thing is that we updated the costs as I showed you guys last time with the SMA. This increases our costs even further based upon the 100% design. So, it seemed like on this project anyway, 60%, then to 90%, then to 100%, it kept increasing. That's both on the design side that we needed more design based upon some complexities, but also on the construction side that every time we got, that new design, we understood a little bit more about the project and thus design costs or construction costs increased. So I'll note that, we have 250 devoted to this project between design and construction in previous adopted budgets. And so we are inching closer to that. This should be the kind of all in. This is 100% with 8% construction contingency. And we still have some additional cap in that to go up to 250 if we have to. But in this particular case, what we're trying to do is we have this updated cost, and now we want to make sure that the county is comfortable with having that 2/3, 1/3 cost share. This being a county highway, and so this would update that agreement that we previously had to basically similar to the SMA to update the cost associated with the project. And so, this is the resolution is basically that, we previously adopted this as the first revision to that is specifically related to revised design and construction costs. And the city does have funds available for this. With that, take any questions.
Are there any comments or questions or motions pertaining to this?
I've got a question. On Tuesday, the council actually approved an update to the contract with KL Engineering, I believe, for design, where it increased our share of the cost by about 10,000. Is that incorporated into this estimate?
Yeah, that's this additional engineering here, and so that
Okay.
includes some additional design costs associated with some, and yeah, so that's the increased design cost component of this, whereas the increased construction is more about some of these elements that were added and then just more refined costs as the design gets more refined. Yeah, good catch. And as you mentioned last time, it does seem like the costs just keep going up. But
Andrew, could you click the plus sign to expand that a little bit?
Yes, sorry. It looks okay on my screen, but I'm sure it's tiny in there. So yeah, just to kind of run through it quickly. So this is a capped amount, kind of all in for the state based upon what the original HISF application was. This is a 1/3 of kind of the remaining cost and 2/3 of that remaining cost to the county.
All right. Can I have a motion to approve this resolution?
I move it.
Is there a second? That was Jason, I think.
This is Charlie, second.
That was a second. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor of this motion, please indicate by saying aye.
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 All those opposed? Hearing none, the resolution is approved by this committee. Which brings us to item 7 on the agenda, report from the department. What have you got, Andrew?
Yeah, so as far as construction goes, I think you all will be interested. Fish hatchery is moving along as planned. We'll have some signal turn-ons on the northern half in the next week or so. So look for those. They'll go into flash first, and then we'll have kind of stop-and-go operations eventually. But so I think that would be kind of the next thing that you'll definitely notice as you're traveling through there. Certainly, a lot of work has been done there, from grinding up all the old concrete for new bays to some of the utility work that you'll never see because it's underground. The retaining wall looks great on the south side, just south of McKee, so we did have to close down the trail, the bridge over there, but now that's back open with a temporary path there, so that's great. And then we do have some work going on down at just north of City Hall at East Sherrill and Woods Hollow, a bulb out there. And so they're done with the north half. They're going to shift to the south half next week. Let's see what else. And I guess the big thing that I like, I'm going to invite Jason to elaborate on a little bit because he's involved with it. So we're doing a very similar thing, as I noted in previous meetings, to what the West Lacey Advisory Group is doing. We're now doing that with the South Saline reconstruction project as well. So I think taking a similar model, trying to kind of invite folks who are interested to kind of share some more time, kind of go back and forth, get in the weeds a little bit more. And Jason is a resident out there, and I thought he would be a great, this seemed like a great opportunity to have him be able to kind of be a liaison and transmit some of the insights that we gained. So I don't know, Jason, if you have anything, otherwise I can elaborate a little bit on today's meeting.
Well, I mean, I think there are insights on, the specific parts of that corridor. I don't know. I mean, each section is pretty unique. I think the thing that's got the biggest, I guess, gets people the most anxious is the area right near the McCoy farmhouse. I don't think there's as much disagreement further south and further north, but right around that little stretch around McCoy farmhouse.
Yep, for sure. And so right now we're just kind of walking through cross-sectional elements, terrace, buffered bike lane, shared use paths, sidewalks, medians. Just kind of talking about the pros and cons, similar to what we did in West Lacey. And then we're honing in on some specific locations, knowing that, that area is really the tightest and kind of, trickiest to, just like with West Lacey, there's certain areas that are just harder to manage outcomes on and make sure that we're, keeping a balance. So that's where we're starting. But yeah, I think we'll have weekly meetings until we kind of get our feet on our ass a little bit and then go to bi-weekly. And so we'll certainly have, I think every meeting we'll have a kind of a check-in, just kind of share with what insight we've gained so far. And this is all kind of culminating, hopefully, in a typical section resolution in June for you guys to weigh in on.
I think the only other insight I would add is that, we have these separate construction projects, but it really is, it really is, I think, helpful to look at them all at once as how Fitchburg is developing, because, Lacey Road is a major road going east to west. Saline is a major road going north-south. And we've got big developments on the east side of Fitchburg. And how do people go east to west in our city? How do people go north and south? So I think it's helpful for people not to just look at it as this is a road in my neighborhood in front of my house versus how does this impact Fitchburg as a whole?
Yeah, that's a great point. And I can, if you guys would be interested in this, I could certainly try to get some exhibits going of kind of where, similar to our CIP exhibits of kind of where these projects are in kind of a holistic sense, so they're not so fragmented. That'd be interesting.
Okay. Are there other comments at this point about Andrew's overview? Andrew's update? Hearing none, I'm trying to get my agenda. I think the last remaining item on the agenda is to announce that we have our next meeting is June 10th. And unless there's any discussion on that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Actually, I got one question. I'm sorry, Will. I was in transit in the very beginning of the meeting. Did we have anybody new added to the commission?
No.
We haven't seen anyone in council yet.
Okay.
So as far as I'm concerned, the mayor hasn't made an appointment. I don't know if that's because he's still considering or because he hasn't received any applications, but we haven't looked at it in council yet.
Because it would probably be important at some point to know how many we need for a quorum, because usually there's a
Yes.
specific number.
Yep.
That was my only question.
Okay, I agree. I certainly agree with that. So we should know that for next time. Before we get a motion to adjourn, I just want to say I kind of didn't expect to be chairman. I'll do my best. I've got obviously a lot to learn about issues that this commission has faced in the past and different views on how it should be functioning. And I'll do my best with that. But when we do adjourn, Andrew, if you could just hang on, I just want to talk with you for a few seconds. Having said that, is there a motion to adjourn?
I'll move to adjourn.
Second? There's a motion, second at Gabriella. All right, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
I
Aye.
Aye, opposed, hearing none, we are adjourned. Thank you very much. See you on June 10th.